Hello, I am Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be reviewing all the new split evolutions that have been released to North America and Europe. So, basically in this update we have gained new evolutions for Skald, Verdandi, all three Sonias, red, blue, green, as well as Zuoh and two split Denebola evolutions. Now, I'm going to be recapping all the various changes that are occurring with these evolutions and helping guide you in terms of which path you should take, because these are all part of split evolutions, because you need to essentially choose you want to take the older evolution or the newer evolution that just came out. But generally speaking, the newer evolutions tend to come with the sexier awakenings, such as follow-up attack and 7 combo awakening, which I'll explain more as we progress. So, what is the Holy Trinity of Awakenings? Now, the Holy Trinity of Awakenings are what I consider the 3 most powerful awakenings that we have currently available. Those include 7 Combo Awakening, Guard Break, and Follow-Up Attack. And due to the fact that these are relatively new awakenings, they're somewhat scarce. We don't have many cards that actually possess these awakenings. Yes, over time we are going to gain more as those evolutions and updates trickle in from Japan, but for the time being, these awakenings are still somewhat scarce, and because of that, cards that do possess these awakenings tend to be stronger for the most part, because again, they are able to provide significantly more utility or value to your team than other options that are currently available. So ideally, we want to try and pursue cards with as many of these awakenings as possible and capitalize on their usage before they become more widespread, and then the dungeon power creep catches up to basically the awakening power creep. So 7 Combo Awakening essentially provides double damage when you hit 7 or more combos, which is a massive damage increase. Guard Break allows you to ignore that enemy's defense for that particular monster, which is great for pre-draws or other high defense encounters. But Follow-Up Attack is actually the newest of the 3 and arguably one of the most powerful ones, because Follow-Up Attack awakenings are essentially called resolve killers, because the way it works is you create a column of 5 heart orbs or 6 on a 7x6 board, and only that amount. You can't have any extra hearts sticking off of it. And when you do that, you'll get a special animation, but it will cause 1 true damage to occur after you do all of your other damaging hits. So normally with resolve bosses, what happens is you would hit them with all your damage, they go down to 1 health, and then they trigger this dangerous 1% ability. However, with follow-up attack, what's going to happen is you still do your damage and knock them down to 1 health. They survive because of the resolve, but then this follow-up attack does this 1 little true damage, and that actually executes that resolve encounter, because now they are left with 1 health, and now it goes to 0. They die. You don't have to dance around with these 1% execution abilities, because generally speaking, most things under the 1% threshold tend to kill you because they do something terrible. They hit for gigantic amounts of damage, or they resurrect, or just silly things happen. So now we have what is essentially the cleanest and tidiest way to deal with resolve bosses, unless you're playing a row-based team. Row-based teams can never form their row, so the follow-up attack kind of goes against their whole mantra. But to be fair, row teams are starting to become less popular or less prevalent, just because combos are a little stronger for the most part. So presently speaking, before this new update, we only had the 2 Monster Hunter cards and 1 June Bride card, all of which are on the rarer side, so they're very difficult to actually acquire. So we were kind of scarce and deprived from follow-up attack awakenings. But now with the Norns, which is Skald, and Verdandi being released, we now have significantly easier access to follow-up attack awakenings. And this is actually going to provide more value for guaranteed heart spawn generators such as Mel or Weejas, because Mel and Weejas provide you at least 5+ heart orbs, and those 5+ heart orbs can obviously be manipulated into such a way that you get that follow-up attack awakening. However, what I want to stress is that a card like Weejas is actually stronger because it makes 6. And the 6 is important because when we get the 3x3 box awakening in the distant future, you will need to have at least 6 orbs of a different element to basically wall off a 3x3 square. So 3 there, 3 down here, makes a 3x3 box. That makes that box awakening combo trigger. So these cards with guaranteed heart spawn generators are more valuable if you're doing certain farming build setups. You make the whole board of your primary element, then you pop the Weejas or Mel, and you get that follow-up attack awakening alongside of it. So, one last thing I want to highlight before is that the follow-up attack awakening allows you to deal 1 true damage. So that means it's going to be pinging those high defense monsters for 1 additional damage. Now, depending on the cards you have of Follow-Up Attack Awakening, you may or may not have a sub-attribute, but let's just assume everyone has a sub-attribute. So the maximum damage you could deal is 12. With this Follow-Up Attack Awakening, you are going to be pinging for 13. So this may or may not allow you to hasten through certain levels where there are monsters with those high defense that you need to ping down. So this could be an interesting way to speed up that process, or possibly avoid certain mechanics if you didn't, because you didn't wait as long. So the Norns overall. So basically, Erd and Verdandi are both 5-star Godfest exclusives, and because of that, they're significantly easier to acquire compared to Skald. So they're going to be the most universally accessible Follow-Up Attack Awakening cards you have available. However, Skald is naturally the strongest. She has the highest weighted stats, and she has 2 instead of 1 7-combo Awakenings. So she's actually going to be dealing tremendously silly amounts of damage, as well as providing a great deal of bulk and stats to your team. Now, obviously, these cards are basically red, blue, and green, and they ideally fit best on teams that utilize those colors. However, if all you need is a resolve killer, you may or may not be able to get away with using them on your team as a sub, even though they may not be your primary color. And this is because they provide so much value through that resolve killer that you don't have to bring, like, say, delays, gravities, or even damage control, that it can justify their sub-slot usage. Just change their active skill with an inherit of your choice, and you should be good to go. Because, again, you can bypass resolve spawns. Now, like I said, Skald is the strongest of the 3, universally speaking, but Verdandi actually has tremendous value on Kusanagi Hime teams, because not only do you have the 7-combo Awakening and Follow-Up Attack, but Verdandi is healer typing, so that means she can be used to the fullest extent on Kusanagi Hime teams. She also is on color to your Kush, so that means if you're running a more green-heavy Kusanagi Hime team, this is great, because the board changer works well for your team, as well as basically pumping out damage that's akin to your Kusanagi Hime. However, with that being said, Haku is generally the stronger choice overall, because Haku has higher weighted stats, an extra, like 2 TPAs instead of 1. They both have 7-combo Awakenings, so Haku hits harder, but the higher weighted stats, especially in the recovery, can be very meaningful for your Kusanagi Hime teams. But again, if you need the Follow-Up Attack Awakening, a Verdandi on your team is going to work wonders. So, Norns as a leader. So, generally speaking, the Norns are okay leaders. They're not so great, except for Skald, surprise, surprise, being this hands-down strongest winner, because not only does she pair wonderfully well with Julie, but the fact that you're not creating a team of just, like, say, double Skulds with just gigantic amounts of health and no recovery, you're able to have health, recovery, and damage mitigation with the Julie pairing, so this is wonderful overall. So which Norn evolution should you pursue? Now, unless you desperately need the sub-attribute color from your, basically Erd, Verdandi, and Skald, I recommend you go for the new split evolutions, because they're just so much more powerful. You get 7-combo Awakening that's synergistic with their TPAs, as well as the fact that they have higher weighted stats, and it's just stronger overall because you have the ability to deal with resolve bosses, because at this point in time we don't have many different Follow-Up Attack Awakening choices, and for the most part this is the only one in green and the only one in red. Amatsu is also blue, so it's like Blue Sonia is competition, Skald is competition, but again Amatsu is even rarer than Skald. So I would pretty much go for the new split evolutions in almost every case and scenario. So now we come to the Sonias, and the Sonias basically receive new split evolutions that remove their sub-color, change their typings, awarded additional weighted stats, as well as giving bind immunity and providing a 7-combo Awakening. So this is all a big upgrade for the most part, but the problem is the Sonias were not necessarily highly desired subs, because they just didn't really fit very well on meta teams. They brought row Awakenings that didn't help. They have powerful active skills, but you generally wanted to use a card with more beneficial Awakenings and inherit those active skills over top. So it's hard to squeeze them in. Furthermore, the Sonias still retain their row Awakenings, but they also have the 7-combo Awakenings. So generally speaking, unless you are able to puzzle like a wizard or use orb changers, it's going to be very challenging to actually hit 7 combos in a row on a regular basis. So for the most part, one of your Awakenings or one of your damage Awakenings is going to go to waste. You're either not going to make sufficient combos, or you're either not going to make a row with the 7+ combos. So again, they're in a little bit of an awkward place. Yes, they're bind immune, but they don't have any natural way to clear binds, so it's a little awkward to use for the most part. Now, this is a relative upgrade for the most part, but again, we didn't really use the Sonias overall. But one I want to point out is Blue Sonia, because Blue Sonia's claim to fame was her gigantic amount of health, and that gigantic amount of health was sometimes crucial for various mono water teams, because it would allow you to have sufficient bulk to tank large preemptives or large incoming hits without needing to bring a shielding sub. And because she has 0 base recovery, that could have been seen as a drawback, but many popular water teams, most notably Mary, have 6.25 times recovery that you don't really care about the recovery component, you just want the health stacked. And that is what Blue Sonia did perfectly. And if you change your Blue Sonia to the new evolution, you're going to lose that gigantic bulk and get recovery instead. So if you're using your Blue Sonia on your Mary team, this is actually going to be a step backwards for the most part, because you're losing health into recovery, and you don't need recovery at all. So I do caution against switching Blue Sonia, but Red Sonia and Green Sonia can be swapped pretty much at will, because again, it's an upgrade that we're rarely used for the most part already. Sonias as leaders. So Sonias were very popular and powerful leaders back in the day. This is because they provided massive recovery, so they could basically stall things out. Most things didn't hit hard enough, so you never got one-shotted, and they had modest amounts of damage with Rose. However, over time and power creep, the Sonias basically lost a lot of that viability because they didn't have enough damage to keep pace with other leaders. Yes, recovery is nice, but if you hit like a wet noodle, it's not going to do enough to push through endgame content. So these new evolutions do remedy the damage aspect, because now you gain more damage so you can hit harder. However, you do change it so you're boosting different types, so it can restrict your subpool in a different way. But the main issue I want to point out is that they trade the recovery component for a health component. So that means if you do double Sonias, you're going to have teams with gigantic amounts of health, but you're not going to be able to recover at all. And that's going to be very challenging if you're playing, especially in co-op mode, because solo mode you can at least use the recovery badge to help compensate. You'll have modest amounts of recovery, but generally speaking, you may find yourself running out of health quite quickly. So if a dungeon calls for prolonged stalling, or it's a longer dungeon in nature, you're going to have a tough time using double Sonias, because your recovery may not be able to keep pace because you are an orb-hungry team. You have to tank hits, set up the board, or use active skills, and then stall for them later on. Regardless, the point being is you're going to have to take hits over and over again, and if you can't heal from them, there's no point in having a gigantic health pool. In theory, you only need enough health to survive the largest reasonable hit. After that, recovery is more important, because you're basically able to return to full health and tank that reasonable hit once again. So we do want to try and look for recovery-based leadership pairings, but because of the typing restriction, it's going to be very challenging to find something that's complementary, because you're either going to be having your friend's leader not providing enough damage, or possibly having less than ideal subs. So it's not, in my opinion, a very viable leader for the most part, especially when you start getting to more endgame or longer content. Zuoh does look very cool. He does have a revamped leader skill, but it's not powerful or potent enough to actually be used. So Zuoh does retain the Dragon Killer. He does gain higher weighted stats, but generally speaking, Hakus are a superior choice, because Hakus can equip Dragon Killer latents. And yes, Zuoh does have a higher Dragon Killer multiplier. The fact that he has 0 base recovery and that he can't fit on Dark Athena teams is problematic, as well as not having God typing for Dark Metatron. It's just a nightmare to deal with overall. And now we come to Denebola, and Denebola is giving a lot more meaning to the term jammer meta, because the jammer playstyle is not something I'm very fond of, because I just don't think it's that enjoyable at this point in time. And the reason being is that, like, A, it's non-intuitive, it forces you to use active skills, and just, it's slow because you don't necessarily have enough jammers all the time. For the most part, a lot of jammer leaders are very orb-hungry, so it's actually difficult to actually reliably proc your multiplier. And the fact that Gung Ho does not generally release rare machine cards that produce jammer orbs. And that is because jammer orb cards don't help other teams. Like, traditional, or basically any other team in the game, does not want to have jammer orbs on their board. They're dead weight. So it's very difficult for Gung Ho to release REM cards that make jammers, because they're not going to be desirable for the vast majority of the player base. So it's going to cut back on the amount of viable subs you can successfully run. With all that being said, this new split evolution for Denebola is actually very powerful because she is able to achieve 324 times attack and 43.75% damage reduction when you match 2 jammer combos and a total of 6 or more combos. And these are 2 separate entities because you gain the damage mitigation and a modest multiplier for 6+ combos. So you always have your damage mitigation component intact. Provided you can make combos, every board's going to give you at least 6 combos, so you are going to be able to have this defensive multiplier in place all the time. And the fact of the matter is, 1 jammer combo is 144 times, so you're actually able to deal very high amounts of damage at 144 times. And I want to stress that this is actually very powerful because 144 may or may not be amazing if you think like Raw Dragon because Rainbow Team's splitting your damage, but on this team here, you can fill it up with mono red cards with TPA and 7 combo awakenings. So you make that jammer combo, you make 7 combos, you trigger those 7 combo awakenings, you trigger the TPAs, you're going to punch for very high amounts of damage while having this damage mitigation. So this is actually a very powerful leader. Furthermore, their base active skill has a 3-turn cooldown and spawns 3 jammers. So between your 2 leaders, you will have basically 3 jammers for 2 out of every 3 turns. So you are able to punch very hard, and on that turn where you're waiting, you could use other active skills, because you do have 4 subs, or you could just make 6 combos, and you're only dealing 9 times damage, so you're not going to be hurting a boss or pushing it into a danger zone, so you can tank those big hits. So this is actually a very powerful card and leader overall, especially if we start getting, you have more access to jammer making subs. So, with that being said, if jammers are not your jam, the other evolution for her provides you with double TPA, God Killer, and a 7 combo awakening, as well as having a 3-turn base cooldown you can easily inherit over top. So she became a lot more viable as a sub and as a leader overall. So this is a great and exciting evolution for the most part. So, in conclusion, these newly released evolutions are exciting because they add tremendous depth and diversity to these cards. Especially with the Norns, they gain significantly more value overall. They are your best source of follow-up attack damage available, and it's going to help trivialize a lot of challenging things like, say, Ultimate Yamato Rush with like all those resolve bosses. You can just make follow-up attacks and boom, on your merry little way. Furthermore, the Sonias do gain some utility. Zuoh is just a Zuoh, but Denebola gains a lot of viability because now she's a great combo-based sub or even a jammer leader. So let me know what you think about all these new evolutions in the comments below. Which ones are you most excited about? Do you think any of them are going to change up your playstyle or how you approach various dungeons? Let me know what you think. Regardless, I hope you all have a mantastic day and happy puzzling. Bye.